We're swimming in data every single day, at our jobs, on the news, pretty much everywhere. But honestly, all those numbers can feel a little overwhelming. So what we're going to do today is figure out how to look past all those raw numbers and find the real story that's hidden inside. And we'll start with a simple question that actually reveals a lot about how we think.
Okay, let's kick things off with a simple question. We've all seen it. When people start buying more ice cream, they also seem to buy more sunglasses. I mean, the answer seems pretty obvious, right? But here's the thing. This little puzzle actually shines a light on one of the most common and costly traps we fall into when we look at data.
And yeah, that brings us right to our first big idea, the correlation trap. This is that classic situation where we see two things moving together and we just jump to conclusions, assuming one is causing the other. It's one of the biggest myths in data analysis, so let's really unpack it.
Okay, so let's break this down. On one side, you've got correlation. That's simple. It just means two things are changing together. But causation, that's a whole different beast. Causation is when there's a real logical reason for it, a direct link. You could almost say causation is just correlation with a really good reason.
And you know what? We can actually measure this relationship with something called the correlation coefficient. It's basically just a score from -1 to +1. The closer you get to either end, the stronger the connection is. And if you get a 0, well, that means there's no relationship there at all. It's a pretty neat way to put a number on what we're seeing.
All right, so what does this actually look like in the real world? Here's a super common example of what we call positive correlation. So a company decides to spend more on marketing, and guess what? Sales go up. Simple, right? As one thing goes up, the other one goes up too. They're moving in the same direction.
And now, let's flip that on its head. This is a scenario I think many of us know all too well. I like to call this the death by meetings effect. The more hours you spend stuck in meetings, the fewer tasks you actually get done. See? As one thing goes up, the other one goes down. That's a negative correlation, but it's still a very clear relationship.
Okay, so we get the difference. But so what? What happens when we get this stuff wrong? Well, confusing these two isn't just some tiny academic mistake. It can lead to really bad business strategies, wasted money. It can even make people lose trust. The stakes are actually pretty high.
And look, there are a ton of ways to get tripped up by data. I mean, from using bias samples to just not giving any context, it's so easy for an analysis to go completely off the rails. But that big one we've been talking about, confusing correlation with causation, that's probably one of the most common traps of all.
And the cost of making these mistakes? It's just staggering. Get this. One study found that data analysts waste more than 44% of their time every week on dead-end activities. Just think about that for a second. That is almost half of the work week just gone, wasted, all because someone read the story and the numbers wrong.
So how in the world do we avoid falling into these traps? Well, the first part of the answer is actually surprisingly human. It's not about fancier software, it's about people working together better. Because the best data analysis, it's not a solo act, it's a team sport.
And hey, we've got proof this actually works. A 2023 study from the Reuters Institute found that newsrooms that had dedicated data teams, where analysts and journalists were working side by side, they produced a whopping 60% more investigative stories. That's just incredible.
Okay, so what does that look like in the real world? Well, any successful project needs a roadmap, right? It really all starts with the basics: clear communication, knowing who's responsible for what. And from there, you move into this collaborative process of sharing data, looking at it together, and, this is so important, fact-checking each other's work. It's like a blueprint for turning raw numbers into a powerful, accurate story.
And here's how you can think about the team. You've got your number cruncher, the person who's deep in the weeds, cleaning the data, running the analysis, making the charts. And then you've got your storyteller, the one who finds the interesting angle, talks to people, and weaves it all into a narrative that makes sense. When those two work together, they can check each other's blind spots and build something way more powerful than either could alone. All right, so collaboration is huge, but there's one more piece to this puzzle that is absolutely critical, and that is context. I love this way of putting it. Data is a word, context is the sentence that gives it meaning.
Bella Williams from Insight 7 said it perfectly. Data does not exist in a vacuum. I mean, every single data set is shaped by what's going on in the world around it. The economy, cultural trends, whatever just happened in the news. If you ignore all that, it's like trying to read a sentence with half the words blacked out. You're just not going to get the real story.
So, this practice has a name.
It's called contextual data analysis. It's really all about asking why, where, and when behind the numbers. Think about it. A huge spike in customer complaints could look like a total disaster, or it could be the totally expected result of a new product launch that's driving a ton of new traffic. See, the context changes absolutely everything.
So this brings us to a really practical way of thinking about this, especially when things feel messy and uncertain. The sources we looked at call these pivotal properties. They're basically key features of a problem that can make it way easier to solve. Like, you can ask, is this decision reversible? Can we just undo it if it's wrong? Or can we go out and get more data? Just asking those simple questions helps you frame the problem and find a clear path forward.
Okay, so we've talked about dodging that correlation trap, we've talked about the power of working together, and why context is everything. So now let's put it all together. Let's see what happens when you do this right. This is how you get from just a pile of data to a real, meaningful decision.
And honestly, there is no better example of this than the Panama Papers. This was just a monumental task. You had journalists and data experts from more than 100 different organizations all working together to make sense of millions of documents. And by mixing that hardcore technical skill with amazing investigative storytelling, they uncovered this massive global story that led to actual real-world reforms.
And that brings us full circle, all the way back to where we started. Right, so buying ice cream doesn't make you go buy sunglasses. The correlation is definitely there, but the real cause is that hidden third thing that's affecting both. It's the summer. It's just the perfect reminder to always be on the lookout for the context, for that hidden part of the story.
Look, data is everywhere, and every single data set is telling a story. But as we've seen today, just spotting a pattern isn't nearly enough. By working together and by always digging for the context, you can go from just hearing the data to actually understanding what it's saying. So the next time you see some chart or a new statistic, I want you to ask yourself, am I listening to the right story?